Imagine a steel artery stretching across an entire nation, over 1,150 kilometers of pipeline, pushing Canada's most valuable resource from Alberta's oil sands to the Pacific coast. Now imagine that artery being tripled in capacity, transforming into a superhighway for crude oil. This is the Trans Mountain Expansion Project, better known as TMX, a controversial $34 billion endeavor that has tested the limits of engineering, government spending, and public opinion. Capable of transporting more than 141,500 cubic meters of crude oil each day, the expansion is hailed by some as a vital link to global markets and condemned by others as a costly relic of the fossil fuel era. From humble beginnings to national spotlight, the story of the Trans Mountain Pipeline begins in 1953 when a smaller line was built to connect Edmonton, Alberta with Burnaby, British Columbia. For decades, it performed quietly, moving oil to refineries and export terminals and becoming a backbone of Canada's energy infrastructure. But as oil sands production surged in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the pipeline's modest capacity was no longer enough. The mismatch was obvious. The demand to move oil was like trying to funnel a waterfall through a garden hose. The solution was bold yet simple in concept: construct a second, larger pipeline alongside the original, essentially twinning it. This expansion would not only meet domestic needs but also open a gateway to Asia, giving Canada's landlocked oil industry access to global markets. The idea was straightforward, but the execution would prove to be a decades-long saga, building across brutal terrain. The Trans Mountain expansion demanded construction through some of the most unforgiving landscapes in North America. This was not a project of laying pipe across flat prairies, but rather a test of engineering against mountains, rivers, and even urban centers. One of the most astonishing feats was the Burnaby Mountain Tunnel, built directly beneath a bustling city and university campus. Engineers had to bore a 2.6-kilometer-long passage through solid rock, wide enough to house 3 large pipelines side by side. To accomplish this, they used a tunnel boring machine nicknamed Burnaby Nellie, which functioned like a colossal mechanical worm, grinding through the earth while installing concrete walls behind it. The result was an underground passage that allowed oil to flow undetected beneath neighborhoods and classrooms, preserving life above ground. Crossing rivers presented an entirely different set of challenges. The pipeline had to traverse 75 waterways, including the mighty Fraser River. Digging a trench across the riverbed was out of the question, both environmentally and logistically. Instead, engineers turned to horizontal directional drilling, a method akin to underground surgery. A small pilot hole was drilled from one bank to the other, deep beneath the riverbed, before being gradually widened to make room for a steel pipeline. The Fraser crossing, stretching 1.4 kilometers, required threading a flexible steel tube almost a mile long through unpredictable soils. It was painstaking, expensive, and time-consuming, but it safeguarded the river's fragile ecosystem and avoided disrupting ship traffic. Perhaps the greatest test of all was the Rocky Mountains. Traditional methods were too risky for slopes, so steep they could barely be climbed on foot. Controlled blasting was used to break apart rock in carefully measured bursts, avoiding catastrophic landslides. To maneuver the massive steel sections, specialized cable crane systems acted like industrial-scale zip lines, hoisting and lowering the pipes along cliffs and ravines. Each piece of the pipeline, weighing tons and stretching over a meter in diameter, had to be handled with surgical precision in terrain prone to avalanches and rock slides. Strength, safety, and science. The physical structure of TMX is as remarkable as its construction. The pipeline is built from high-strength, thick-walled steel designed to withstand decades underground. Each section was factory-coated with fusion-bonded epoxy to prevent rust and corrosion, while portions that pass under rivers or highways were given an extra layer of abrasion-resistant material. This suit of armor ensures durability even in the most demanding conditions. Safety was a paramount concern, and the expansion incorporates some of the most advanced monitoring technology ever installed in a pipeline. A centralized control center oversees the entire 1,150 kilometers around the clock, using software that continuously measures flow, pressure, and the chemical characteristics of the oil. If even the slightest anomaly occurs, alarms are triggered, and emergency shutoff valves can halt the flow almost instantly. To provide additional protection, fiber optic cables were laid alongside the pipeline. These cables act as sensitive listening devices, detecting vibrations, temperature changes, and ground movement that could signal trouble before a disaster strikes. At each of the 12 pump stations that push oil along the line, ultrasonic flow meters provide pinpoint accuracy, adding another safeguard to prevent leaks or spills. Expanding Canada's gateway to the world. The expansion extended beyond the buried pipeline. On the Pacific coast, the West Ridge Marine Terminal near Vancouver was overhauled to handle the expected surge in exports. 3 new berths were constructed to accommodate Aframax-class tankers, mid-sized vessels suited for trans-Pacific journeys. Storage facilities were also dramatically expanded. At Burnaby alone, 14 new tanks were built, raising capacity from 1.685 million barrels to more than 5.5 million. These upgrades ensure that oil can be stockpiled and loaded efficiently, preventing bottlenecks and delays as shipments leave Canada for overseas buyers. The cost explosion. If the engineering feats of TMX are jaw-dropping, so too is the price tag. When first proposed, the expansion was expected to cost between 5 and 7 billion Canadian dollars. By 2024, after years of delays, legal disputes, and construction challenges, that estimate had ballooned to an astonishing 34 billion. The project became one of the most expensive pieces of infrastructure in Canadian history. When Kinder Morgan, the pipeline's original owner, faced insurmountable opposition, the Canadian government stepped in and purchased the project in 2018. Critics derided the move as a bailout, while supporters argued it was a necessary step to ensure national energy security. Now, with costs having spiraled out of control, Ottawa hopes to sell the pipeline to recoup part of the public investment. Whether that sale will cover even a fraction of the ballooned costs remains uncertain. Controversy and opposition. The Trans Mountain expansion has not only been an engineering challenge, but also a social and political flashpoint. Environmentalists have long argued that the risks outweigh the benefits. A spill in the Salish Sea could devastate ecosystems, harming endangered killer whales and disrupting vital salmon runs. The increased tanker traffic itself introduces underwater noise pollution, which interferes with marine mammals' ability to communicate and hunt. Another major concern is the type of oil being transported. Diluted bitumen, a heavy crude common in Alberta's oil sands, does not float on water like conventional oil. Instead, it can sink, making cleanup efforts extraordinarily complex and costly. Indigenous opposition has been equally fierce. Many First Nations have argued that their consent was not properly obtained and that the project threatens their lands, waters, and cultural heritage. Now, communities along the route have also raised concerns about temporary work camps, often referred to as man camps, which can bring social challenges and safety risks to nearby populations. Legal battles have reached the highest courts in Canada, yet despite these challenges, the pipeline continued to push forward until completion, the final stretch. After decades of planning and years of construction, the Trans Mountain expansion officially began commercial operations on May 1st, 2024. It is currently operating in a testing phase and is expected to reach full capacity by the end of the year. Once fully operational, it will nearly triple the volume of crude reaching the Pacific coast, potentially altering Canada's place in global energy markets. Whether it will deliver on its promises of economic benefit or instead stand as a cautionary tale of overspending remains to be seen. A lifeline or a gamble. The Trans Mountain expansion project is both a monument to engineering achievement and a lightning rod of controversy. On one hand, it represents the successful overcoming of extraordinary physical challenges, from tunneling under mountains to drilling beneath powerful rivers. On the other, it embodies the risks of mega projects, runaway costs, political entanglements, and the persistent question of whether fossil fuel infrastructure has a place in a world increasingly shifting toward renewable energy. For supporters, TMX is a lifeline, connecting Canadian oil to markets that can ensure economic stability for decades to come. For critics, it is a gamble that prioritizes short-term profit over long-term sustainability. Regardless of perspective, the Trans Mountain expansion has cemented its place in Canadian history as both an engineering triumph and a symbol of the difficult crossroads between energy development and environmental responsibility. And that wraps up the incredible story of the Trans Mountain expansion. An engineering triumph, a political battlefield, and one of the costliest infrastructure projects in Canadian history. But what do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the world's most ambitious pipeline projects, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.